The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
If you can just make sure that your, what do I want to say?
I'm a business intelligence engineer at Global Trans and co-author of Data on Wheels. So that's why I've got this little logo down here. I co-write with my dad, Steve Hughes. I'm also a homeowner, currently trying to remodel my basement. A little background on me. I've been professionally in the IT world for about a year now. I've been working on Power BI since 2017 in my free time. I love to push the boundaries of my old jobs, and which that led me to analytics, and Power BI is my tool of choice. Recently, I've been working in Power Apps and Power Automate to aid in a new low-code, no-code solution for my current CTO, rounding out my Power Platform experience. So today we'll be talking about saving the day from delay, the importance of date tables and how they can aid in increased data model compression, scalability of your report and reporting, and allow for better end user experience. There we go. So brief overview for you guys. We're going to talk about a couple of topics. Firstly, we're going to go into optimization please, which is a common request that we receive from our end users, especially as we get into mammoth-sized data sets and data models. We're going to go over native date hierarchies and how those can hinder your optimization. And then we're also going to go over give a mouse a cookie principle. From there, the solution to a lot of those problems is going to be honing in your data models. So we're going to learn how to drop those native date hierarchies. We're going to build a robust date table in M, and we're going to strategically name our tables for measure scalability. Then in the demo, like I said, we're going to build out that M date table, and we're going to reconfigure the data model to accommodate that. All right, so optimization please. I'm sure as many of you have heard from different end users, one of the biggest complaints I get on my bigger data sets is that they take forever to load, and none of the visuals load within a minute sometimes if you get up into the 12 million rows. So the reason behind all that is within mammoth data sets and models, you have a compression that Power BI does natively within the VertiPack engine. So one of the fastest ways to optimize your data model using that VertiPack engine is to kind of understand how it works, right? So the VertiPack engine, it does a vertical data compression instead of a horizontal. So all that means is it's going column by column and compressing it at the column level instead of at a row level. So if you think about it this way, you've got 12 million rows of data, and one of them happens to be United States names. There should only be about 50 records in there, maybe 51 if you include District of Columbia. So what Power BI will do to compress that data model is it'll look at those 12 million rows and say, oh, I've only got 50 some unique data points. Perfect. Let me compress that down, and we're going to store that as 50. You can see really quickly how that's going to really increase your performance. Unfortunately, the reverse is also true if you've got high cardinality columns, such as dates. Dates, for example, consume a lot of your data model, especially if you have a lot of them. One of the reasons for that is the special characters. You've got slashes, if you've got timestamps on there, if you're using UTC formatted timing, all of that will really bloat your data model and can make a lot of your visuals load a lot slower. So Power BI, I'll go into the next bucket here, native date hierarchies. You might have seen them when you're building your report. Essentially, we'll look at it in the demo again, but it's a little drop down underneath each of your date fields that kind of says year, quarter, month, day. Super helpful if you're building a report and it's super small and all you need is a quick little visual that essentially shows some measure over time, and you want them to be able to drill down from year to month to day, whatever you're looking for there. Unfortunately, if you have a bigger data model and you have multiple dates in your data model, it will make a native date hierarchy for every single date present in your model. You can see quickly how it's going to add up, especially if you've got even more than 5 million rows. I'd say it becomes a problem very fast. The reason for that is that it creates a hidden table for each hierarchy, and each of those tables gets stored on your data model, which again doesn't compress well, and will just slow down your entire report. A lot of times if you go online and you search Power BI data model optimization, removing these native date hierarchies is typically one of the first 3 steps that they say to pull in. Now, again, if you have like 30 different date fields, another optimization technique is to drop those columns that you're not using, right? So if you've got things like first and last ship date, but you're only looking at the last ship date, go ahead and drop that first ship date. It's going to save you a lot of space in your data model and really clean up your reports. Lastly, the give a mouse a cookie principle. Now, not all of you might have grown up with the childhood story of where if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for a glass of milk. And by the end of the book, essentially, you're giving the mouse your house. So the idea here is if you give the business 1 report, they're going to ask for 50 more reports by the end of the month. We've all seen it happen. It's a typical IT thing. You give them 1 cool thing, and they're going to want the world from it. Not a bad thing, but what we're going to do in this example is also walk you through how date tables can make your reporting platform a lot more scalable, and it'll make it easier to build out those future reports as you go along in Power BI. All right, so honing in on data models. This is going to be our solution to those optimization problems. So essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to build out that robust date table in M. We're going to drop those native hierarchies, and we're going to switch visuals to the new date table. So some of you guys, when I mentioned M, probably cringed on the inside. M is not a very popular language for the most part because it doesn't really relate to much else except for itself many, many times. So we're going to give it a chance. I will tell you at the end of all this, I will put out a blog post probably tomorrow that will include all the code that I'm going to use as well as some additional lines of M for a very robust date table build out. The nice thing about M is that you can copy and paste the code directly in the advanced editor without necessarily needing to rebuild a whole bunch of calculated columns like you would need to do in DAX. So there are advantages to using M. It's not the most elegant language, but I will say that the UI, when you know what you're doing, is really flexible and can really aid you in report building. All right, so I'm gonna exit out of here and we'll get into the demo real quick. So this really report is a very simple report, right? We've only got probably 60,000 rows total in here, 27,000 orders. This is mostly just to kind of show you guys the different hierarchies, and then we're going to build out that date table. So to start out with, you see we've got orders by year, and I've got my order date in here, and this is what I mean by a native hierarchy right here. So if you kind of look over here, we've got order date and then date hierarchy, and you'll notice for every single date table that I've got in here, we've got a date hierarchy that goes along with it. These are those hidden tables I was talking about. So these will greatly slow down your compression rates, and they're also going to slow down your report when you publish it to the service. Again, 60,000 rows, it's not going to be a huge impact, but the moment you get above 5 million, I'd say you'll notice significant report improvements if you get rid of these. Speaking of, to drop these, all you're going to have to do is go over to your little handy dandy file tab right up here. And then if we go down to options and settings, we'll go to options. You have a couple different options for dropping these native tables. One of them is global. I would be very careful about dropping this globally because any report that you open after this, it will drop your hierarchies. So like I said before, this isn't necessarily for all and every report, but for your big ones, you're going to definitely want to drop them. I usually leave this turned on for defaulting because most of your reports aren't going to be more than 5 million rows. So we'll go down to current file, and we're going to go ahead and uncheck this little box. So under time intelligence, you'll notice auto date time. If you see this little icon here, basically tells you what I was just mentioning. Automatically create a hidden date table for each field in that model that has a date or a date time data type. So unfortunately, there's no way to get the hierarchy without those separate tables for each one. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop it, and you're going to see our visual change. There we go. So if you look here now, if you look at this visual, that is a hot mess. Nobody wants to look at the dates like this. It is very rare you will find anyone who wants to have it default to the day level. Sure, eventually they want to drill down to it, but this is kind of impossible to see year-over-year trends this way. So if I look over here and I try to add my hierarchy back in, you'll notice my hierarchies have all disappeared. And that was on purpose. So we have no more birth date hierarchy, we've got no more due date hierarchy. That alone is going to take out probably about 50% of your space that your data model is consuming. So I've had instances where I had a report that was 8 million rows. It was at 400,000 kilobytes when I was looking at it online. Then I got rid of these and it dropped it down to 200,000. Performance sped up significantly. So let's go dig into this data just a little bit. I already kind of prepped it, so I want to show you guys what I did. So you'll notice we have order date, which is still formatted as a date. If you really want to save a lot of space, I recommend removing all of these columns, anything with a date timestamp, and instead go with something that's formatted like a whole number like this, where we've got our order date key. So you'll notice we've got year, month, day, year, month, day, year, month, day. Now the reason why this compresses a lot better than your full date is because what Power BI is doing with the date fields is it's having to recognize each of those special characters as well. In this case, it's able to compress a whole number a lot better than it's able to compress a date field. You see the same thing in SQL. If you can, use a date key instead of an actual date format. So with this in mind, we have to remember that we need eventually something to join onto this, right? We're gonna need something that connects back to this year, month, day model. So I'm gonna go ahead and go up to our transform data. So if you're not familiar with it, essentially what this does is it's your query editor. If you're familiar with Excel, it's a Power Query editor, same engine, pretty close to the same UI, which is nice. You can hit the drop down and hit it here, but this little icon will also get you back up. So I've already made a couple little things for you guys. So I want to show you real quick what the end result will be. And we're not going to go through all these examples, but this is what I'm going to provide to you guys in the blog post. So just a little sneak peek for you. Essentially, you're going to have pretty much any way you're going to want to slice and dice the data according to date. And again, you can always come in and add your own fields, that kind of thing, rename whatever you're looking for. So to start out, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just kind of start from scratch and I'll show you guys basically how to get here, right? So if we start with a blank query, the first thing you're going to want to do is go into this advanced editor and we're going to make ourselves a couple of variables. So I'm going to call this start date and I'm going to have it equal. You have to do hashtag date is the syntax here in order to format this as a date. But if I remember my data set correctly, I believe it starts in 2010. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll do a comma because the end of M always has to have commas, every line. We'll do end date. We're going to do formatting as a date again. And I'm just going to do 2020. My data set doesn't go to 2020, but for a couple of our examples, we're going to need something with current dates in it just to show you guys how to add those kind of fields to it. Then I'm going to go with length. So essentially the range that I want to have would be the difference between these two. So let's do hashtag duration. And then we're going to go end date minus start date. And you'll notice it kind of calls these variables for me. Pretty handy. Unfortunately, unlike SQL, it doesn't color code them for you. But if you hover over them, it will tell you what they currently are referencing. And then lastly, I'm going to do today. Oh, almost forgot my little comma. Here we go. So for today, I'm going to do date, time, and then usually it's best to do the UTC now. It's usually what I go with. All right, and then comma again. So for our source, I'm going to go ahead and do list. And we're going to go ahead and throw in here. Let's do list at, I think it's dates. Yep, there we go. So we'll do a list of dates. We're going to do our start date variable at the beginning. And you could plop all this in here, right? But essentially what I'm doing with these variables is it makes it a lot easier for someone to come in and edit. It's very easy to understand code when you've written in some variables. Again, very similar to SQL, very similar to the new new DAX functions where you can add those variables in as well. Just makes your code a lot easier to understand and cleaner. So now for my count, I'm going to do my length. So essentially that's going to be the count of whatever steps, which is the third part of the syntax here. So the nice thing about doing length is I'm not manually calculating how many days are between those years. Makes my life a little bit easier. So then step as duration, you'll remember the typing for this is going to be hashtag duration, similar to what we did up here. Now with this hashtag duration, I'm going to explicitly call it out. So I'm going to say essentially this is 1 day, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. All right. Let's see if that worked for us. Oh, we forgot one step. Let's see. Step 4. Give me 1 second. This is why we prep. Local time now, duration, oh, forgot days. So essentially for the length function, you'll see here duration.days. I forgot to call out what time frame I wanted there. So you go ahead and edit that real quick. So let's do this guy. Duration.days. Should be good to go. There we go. All right, so now we have a list. Unfortunately, I kind of want a table. Thankfully, the GUI and M is very easy. So I'm gonna go over here and convert it to a table. I usually leave all this as show errors and then none. You shouldn't have any errors with this kind of auto-generated list. Awesome. So then I'm gonna go ahead and label this as my date, and then I'll come in here and I will change this to date. Pretty simple stuff. Now this doesn't help us at all because if I closed and applied this and I tried to join it on, let's say I did delete that order date field, I have nothing to join this on. So the first thing I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna break this apart and then add in my key to join onto. So I'll show you what I mean. This is also going to help with the hierarchy builds, because you remember in those hierarchies we had year, quarter, month, day. We're going to have to build those out manually here. Again, thankfully, very, very easy in the Power Query editor. I just come up to add column up here. I'm going to go into date, and I will call out, don't go to transform, because this will eliminate your date column, and I'll show you what I mean. If I go in here and I do transform, I no longer have my date column. So instead, what I want to do is I want to add a column. I'm going to go up to my add column tab. Let's do year. Boom, there's my year. Easy peasy. Now I'm going to click back on my date column and I'm going to grab my quarter next. Easy. Let's do month. And you'll notice you've got options in here. I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but you've also got name of month. So if I wanted to get January, pretty simple. I'm also going to do the month number. You'll see why in a second. And then let's grab day as well. Oh, not day of week. Although that's kind of fun. We'll leave it in there. So you can see that you've got lots of options here. There's not too much you'll have to do yourself. So there we go. At least by hard coding in M, right? So what we're going to do next is now that we've got our pieces, we're going to actually make that date key. So if I go back to my date table, you can kind of see my order date key has got year, month, day. However, the months, I'm going to need to add a 0 in front of it before I can actually put it all together. So there are a couple ways to do this. You can break it up and do the months where you add the 0 in front and then add the 0 in front of day as well, and then do a concatenate to bring them all together with the year, or you can do it all in one step. So I'll show you how to do it all in one step, because why start easy when we can start difficult? No, just kidding. But it will make it a little bit easier to kind of walk through. So I just kind of go up here and I add the custom column. This is going to require you to write just a little bit of M. Thankfully, it's pretty similar to DAX. There's just a couple little nuances. I'd say it's closer to SQL than anything else. But if I'm going to make this new custom column, I'm going to call this my date key. And I'm going to use a function called text combine. Now, what text combine needs is a list. So to generate a list in M, you do the curly brackets. So I'm going to start with that. And then it looks like the second one is going to be a separator as nullable text. For that, I'm going to do just a blank double quotes. But when we get there, I'll show you what I mean. So to start out with, what we're going to want is we're going to want text from. So essentially what text from does is converts it to text. Because if you look at all these, right, they're all kind of number values. So I'm going to need to convert them to text. So we will do year first. Easy, that's done. However, the month one, we're going to need to wrap that in an if statement in order to get that leading 0. So I'm just going to say if text length, and we'll do the text from again, month, and we want this month. If that equals 1, then I'm going to do another text combine. So let me go ahead and do text combine. We're going to combine a 0, and you have to put it in double quotes because this is a text combine. And then I'll do the text from again. I know this is a little tedious, but you could split this all up into different steps, right? I could do this section, this adding the 0, as its own step. I find it a little bit easier just to throw it all into the same step. Just saves me some time and some applied steps on the side. So if I got this one done, so let's see, and actually it's not a comma. This is where my syntax gets a little messed up. So we've got if the text length of month is 1, then what I want it to do is combine a 0. So essentially add a leading 0 in front of month. And remember, we have to make this a list. So let me do that again real quick. And then this is where you're going to see that separator. I'm just going to do blank double quotes because I want them to be right next to each other. So if I want that, else, I'm going to do the text from again, but this time we're going to do text just from month. Perfect. Awesome. So that should do that. So let me just format that a little bit differently. So we've got our text from year. Otherwise, if the month is 1, then I want to combine that 0 with that 1, else take that text. So you might have thought about this already. Date is going to have the same problem. So I'm going to do a comma here, and I'm just going to paste that formula again. I call that efficient coding. And then we're going to call that day column from earlier. Day, and again, all this will be available at the end. So don't worry too much about copying what I'm doing right now. We will send it out. But so let's see, we've got all of that going for us. Perfect. I'm going to close out that list, do another comma, do our little separator, and we should be good to go. Now this handy dandy little checkbox is basically saying it detects no syntax errors. However, that doesn't mean that it's going to work. So let's go ahead and see. Oh, sweet. All right. So let's make sure this has the right behavior we're looking for. We've got our year as the first 4 digits. Perfect. Month. Yep, that's what I wanted. And day. Perfect. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I want to make sure that this behavior works. Oh, beautiful. When we still have double digits, right? If our length was more than 1, I wanted it to just grab in the initial value. So if I keep scrolling a little bit more, I want to check November. Perfect. We've still got the correct behavior going for us. So you might have noticed on your applied steps, it kind of names them for you. I'm going to right click on here and rename this, add a date key, in case I need to change this later on. Then I know exactly what step to go back in and hit this little gear, and I can edit it from there. A lot simpler than trying to go through each step, or even worse, try and go into the advanced editor and figure out the code that you needed to change here. So let's go ahead and call this another whole number. Perfect. All right. So I know that's a lot. I'm going to go ahead and close and apply. There's a lot more to these date tables that we could have added in. But I'm going to go ahead and close and apply, and I'm going to show you guys how to join all this together and make your reports, all your visuals look good again. So let me go ahead and close and apply for now. There we go. Now you might have noticed that in our date, oh, I should have renamed that to date, but we know it's query 1 is our date. So let me go ahead and call this date key. Awesome. And we need to build a relationship here, because if I just pull in this date here, we're just going to get blank. Or actually, even worse, we're just going to get the same value across because Power BI doesn't know how to slice this. So to solve for that, what we're going to do is go into our handy dandy modeling tool. And I'm going to grab that date key again and my data. So if we come back over here, you'll remember that my main date in this table was order date key. I'm going to join that onto my date table right there. 1 to many, perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. Now if I go back, you'll notice we've got that nuance again, which is exactly what we were hoping for. However, you'll notice we still don't have our date hierarchy. That's okay. Don't worry. We've got this because we have our year, quarter, month, day right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop year in first. Oh, perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping to see. Now, the only annoying thing, right, is it sorted it by orders instead of sorting it by year. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to sort by year. There we go. And I actually want it ascending, right? You want your lowest year at the beginning so we can kind of see change over time. Then I'm going to drop month in next. Actually, I can drop quarter in above that. And then we'll do day at the bottom. So I just want to show you real quick this behavior. So if I go ahead and expand 1 level down in the hierarchy, you'll notice now we have our month number. Now, this is where it would be very helpful to just drop in that month name instead, because that's kind of what we want to see, right? Right after we do quarter, we want our month name. This starts to look real goofy real quick. So what I tend to do is I'll come into my formatting tool, go to my x-axis, and let's see. We turn that off. We should be good to go. Let's throw in our date at the top. Sometimes it's a little goofy when you're changing over. Don't worry about that too much. So let's go ahead and we'll drop that again. Concatenate labels on, labels off. That's being a little goofy, so if we wanted to, another option for us here is to just go ahead and we can go with our date, and we can go ahead and make a new hierarchy. So you'll notice now it does that hierarchy and it'll make a subtable for us. So it calls it date. I can go ahead and add date or add year to this. Sometimes it doesn't like the drill over, but you can go ahead and add it to the hierarchy, the date hierarchy. And then if you wanted to, you can move it up because I want year to be the top level of this. Then I'll go with quarter next. We'll add to hierarchy. And then we'll do our month name. And day. And actually, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and add day on there. So let's do that. And then we'll move this guy down. Unfortunately, this isn't as drag and drop as everything else. I think they did that just because they didn't want you to accidentally move something onto a bunch of different hierarchies that you weren't planning on. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop all these. And I'm just going to bring in that date hierarchy. You'll notice now we have year. I go down one. And now I've got quarter. Now I've got month. Now I've got day. Now you will have to do this for all of the visuals that you've already built it for. But as you saw, it's not too painful, right? To just go ahead and grab this in. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for right now. Again, you can see it with the drill through. We clicked on 2013, brings us to those 4 quarters. If I wanted to just look at February, then I've got those 3 months. Just that month, just July, or June, sorry. I can come in here and I can look at the trends for just that month and drill it back up. All right, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and bring us back to our presentation here. So here we go. So recap, just a recap for you guys, date tables often are one of the first steps inside of optimization techniques. Again, to start out with, I would go ahead and get rid of columns you don't need first and then do this step. You'll want to remove those native date hierarchies and pull in your own date table. The more robust, the better, because you can do fancy things like is year to date can be a very simple 1 or 0 filter for you. All right, so now I'll open it up to questions. Again, I know I flew through that, so please feel free to ask anything that you're wondering. Go ahead and let's go ahead and look at some of these real quick. Max and min. Yeah, you definitely could have used that. I tend to like to explicitly call it out because max and min are again relative to your query. So it will take longer for M to run that instead of explicitly calling it out. I can show you two real quick in the robust version that I shared with you guys. I do have in there, let's see, a relative date filter for the end date. So if you look at the advanced editor here, I did a local time now and then added a year to it. Just knowing my data set, that's what I plan to do. You can also do the same thing with -1 as a start date. And then you're not going through and updating, I don't know, easily like hundreds of reports every time the year changes. Kind of makes it a little bit more flexible that way. Oh, yes. Okay. I almost forgot to go over that. Thank you. I don't use the calendar functions in DAX anymore. I will say I used to use them, but you run very quickly into the exact same problem of the performance analyzer, or sorry, of performance issues. So DAX is a lot less efficient than M is at running queries. So for M to run a date table is much, much more efficient than DAX, and it will take a lot less space on your data model as well. So let's see, the standard date table outside that. Yep. So a standard date table in SQL is perfect. The nice thing about M is you can even take those and you can apply more things to it, right? So I've had end users ask for me to display the end date if it's the following Sunday. You can add those kind of custom columns in M still without necessarily needing to go to your devs and tell them to add that column into your date table in SQL. Let's see. It's not possible to obtain. It is. That's actually a good question. I believe it is possible. I've used it. I can't remember why I had an issue with it before. It might have been something a little goofy. I have had to account for leap years and such with different date functions, and then to format those date keys gets a little goofy when you have a bunch of nested if statements. But let's see, date to text. Let's go ahead and try it out. Why not? We'll try one. So if I go in here and I do a custom column, and we'll do dates to text. And then I'll pull in that date column. Wow, awesome. Okay, well, that works as well. I will say still worthwhile to know the DAX that it takes sometimes to do those combined functions in case you need goofier formats that aren't built in. But that just saved me a lot of time, so thank you, Robert. I will have to add that into my notes. Can we do that for SSAS sources? I typically would say just import ones. I'm not too familiar with SSAS. I can definitely check it out. Especially with larger data sources. I see where you're saying that, Rose. A lot of times it's not recommended to do import for those, but let me go ahead and check that out. I will take a note of it and I will look at it for you, and it'll come out in my later blog post on this. Let's see, SSAS. All right. So is making the hierarchy within the date tables from M not create memory performance? It does, but a lot less. So if I have, let's say, in my previous example of 12 million rows, let's say I had 16 dates within there, and I consolidate it down to just having the one date hierarchy, that's going to save a lot of space still. Now, I mostly show that because it's easier to pull it into a visual like this, right? But I can just as easily just go in here and do year, month, day, and have the same drill through abilities. Of course, it decided that it needed that to be a legend. I can have the same drill downs. It becomes a sort order question, right? So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come into these visuals again and just make sure that we're sorting on the right thing. But it's a good point, Stephanie. If possible, don't make any more date hierarchies for yourself. Just pull in the fields that you already made previously. Let's see. I will say too, one reason to add a date hierarchy like this is you are able to do unactive joins to different date keys. So if I were to do due date key on here, you can then reference this date relationship inside of a use relationship function. So for example, I've got this measure that just does my orders, and this will default to go off of order date. However, if I made a new measure, I could call this orders by due date, and then throw it in a calculate statement, right? So if I did orders and then use relationship of due date key and date key, we then get slightly different numbers. So in that case, it's not too bad to add a date hierarchy on there because you could have a bunch of inactive relationships. And then if you're using the same date hierarchy, that's still a lot more efficient than using multiple. But yeah, wherever possible, I'd get rid of it too. Let's see. How do you get the months to go in order? So one way to get the months to go in order is I have a month number field, right? So I could click on month name and I can come up to these column tools and I can have it sort by month. And that would get your months in order. You will need something that has a one-to-one relationship. So for every month name, there's only one month number. But if you were to try and sort month name by day, for example, let's see. We're gonna get an error because you can't have more than one value in day for each month name. Just a little trick for you guys. I have occasionally added in my own sort order columns that are essentially just numbers that add up different numbers just to get the right sort order. Kind of do what you gotta do, but that's an easier solution. What happens when there's a whole month of data missing? Will the month show up on the x-axis? Break the line. There we go. Yeah, so it'll show up in the x-axis as a month with 0 data. If you don't want that relationship to happen, see, it won't break the line in the graph. It'll just kind of have it drop to 0, which I would assume is kind of what you want. If you're looking at trending data, you want to be able to see 0. If you do have an instance where you don't want it to show up, you can always come over to your filters tab on the visual and you can find the value that you don't want to be 0 and you can kind of default it to greater than 0. Sometimes I mess up other things though, so I don't recommend it. Wherever possible, I'd keep the data as true as it is. Let's see. Scary. Appreciate it. The last query is your date table. You can. I don't usually set them as my date table. It tends to be something, just an extra step. I've never had any added benefit from it, mostly because with the robust date tables, you can do kind of fun things like you can just filter off of is year to date instead of having to build a complex DAX equation with it. I think date tables themselves tend to be more useful if you're using the implicit date time functions inside of Power BI, inside of DAX. I don't use those because sometimes the behavior is not what I want. So I'll usually make it as explicit as possible so that I can go in and change it if business users have any questions. Better with M code. I usually look at the SQL BI group. Obviously, I don't know if I left it up there long enough, but I will be writing more on the Data on Wheels WordPress. So this is where my dad and I write, and I will typically write on Power BI subjects such as DAX and M. M itself, the best way to learn it that I've ever had is just to go in and mess with the GUI and then hack the M code on the backside. So if you've got the GUI up, essentially what I do a lot is I'll come in here and I'll just kind of mess around with stuff like I didn't know that this existed, which is awesome. That just saves me so much time on other formats that I wanted to create. But if I wanted to do something silly like a conditional column on here, what I might do is just call this like, I'll just leave it as custom and just say like if the date is before or equal to, I don't know, and 1 else 0. This is how I even learned that formatting. Is basically I just did something stupid like that, stupid easy. And you can learn right away in the formula bar, oh, hey, it formats dates using this hashtag date. It's got day, month, or year, month, day. And then it just uses simple brackets to match the column up. Then else, stuff like that is pretty intuitive once you know what you're looking for. So I would highly recommend playing around with the different tools in here, even just little ones like these transforms. So if you come in here and you like add a column, and I just want to format it to all uppercase, well, now I know what formula that takes. So that would be my recommendation. What's the order of the month names? I think we just went over that. How do you handle adding workday date to your calendar? Yes. So it's super easy if your I should say it's super easy if your business runs on a Monday to Friday schedule. In the robust date table that I'll share with you guys, I do have an is weekend column flag. So let me just go ahead and find that real quick. And again, this is the key to renaming your applied steps. I can just find it really fast in all of these different ads. But if you look at this, I basically just looked at the day of the week and said if it's 7, then it's a weekend. If it's 1, that's a weekend. So my day of the week, obviously 7 is Saturday, Sunday is 1, and I just made those weekends, otherwise 0. Makes it for a pretty simple add to your date calendar. So if I look at this, for example, if I look at the 1st of January, I pull this up. We've got that it was a Tuesday, it's the 3rd day of the week. You know, I've got a couple other things in here. Is it a weekend? No, because it's a Tuesday. Let me go ahead and look at something that's Saturday. If I look at this as weekend is 1, obviously you can flip that on your head and call that is workday. And then when you're writing your formulas, you can filter your date table off of that column, and it makes it a lot simpler than trying to calculate it at a row level and say a calculated column in DAX. Yes, that was good. Where can we find the recording after? I think that would be a Crystal question. I don't know, Crystal, if you're still on. If you know exactly where to find this recording.
Yes, you guys will receive the recording tomorrow in your email box if you guys are on here. And if you're not, you can visit our YouTube channel at Pragmatic Works under the free training playlist. All of our recordings, all of our webinars will be in there also. But you guys will receive a link tomorrow in your email box, probably around noon or 1 o'clock.
Perfect. Thanks, Crystal.
No problem.
Best practices for adding fiscal year or period fields in M. So with fiscal year, I would add them as variables. That would just be my default mode, is to add it as a variable for your fiscal year end. And then you can do some kind of date difference from there to calculate the days away. Totally up to you. You can also do, so you know how we did that is year to date flag. Let's go ahead and go in here and I can do that real quick. But essentially for is year to date, all it takes is a couple of little functions. So I was just kind of messing around with a couple little things. And again, there might be an easier way, like you saw with that text function, but essentially what I do is I say, you know, if my month is before today's month, then yeah, that's year to date. I would add in another, kind of like how we added in today. Yeah, that's fine. Kind of like how we added in today in our advanced editor as a function of local time now. You can hard code in your fiscal year end and say if it's before fiscal year end, then yes, it's year to date fiscal year end, or be after. That's what I would do. I would adjust it based off some kind of variable there. Incoming end date table. Up to you. Depends how often you're switching between SQL servers and what you consider local time. My problem is that the company I currently work for has probably 9 different logistics TMSs, which means we've got, I want to say, 5 different servers and easily 12 to 20 databases we're living in at any given time. So to bring in another SQL field just kind of feels like overkill. It's a lot easier for me to go ahead and save my M code like this, and then to pull it in every time I make a new report. I just I copy it and then I go ahead and go blank query, advanced editor, done. I'm not worrying about refreshes. I know that it's going to refresh when I refresh my report, but pretty simple. And I know I have all the different date functions that I want. I don't have write-back permissions to a lot of SQL servers, so this just kind of makes my life easier to work across all the different VMs and different VPNs. Minute, second, to format as that instead of text format. Basically, let me see. Let me find if I have something with time in it. There is a way to do that instead of the text format. I know, for example, if I make this a date time, it's just gonna have midnight in there. But if I wanted to split out the time, I could add a time in here. And I could do time only. And that kind of gets you hours and seconds, or minutes and seconds for you, hours, minutes, second. That's probably what I would do. And then if you needed to parse it out, you can do that as well. Kind of like what we just did with date, right? You could come in and make it hour, and then you could come back to your time and then go minute, whatever you need to do. I would imagine that there's also something that lets you format this one. Similar to what you showed me was an easier way to do the date key. So if I call this like time key, for example, and I just did date, or yeah, I'm sure there's a way to do it that's a lot simpler. But worst case scenario, you can always combine them as you like right there, using a couple of if statements. So I could just do like text combine, and then my hour and minute. And then instead of just doing double quotes, I'd probably just do like that. Close that out. We have to do the text from, but you kind of get the point, right? So you can definitely do it like that. As you saw in the previous example, there's always something more to learn about M. So you might benefit from Googling it as well. Usually the Power BI forums are pretty robust on that sort of thing. It's not liking that formula, but you kind of get the idea. That's probably how I would do it. Range date key. A range date from your date key. Oh, okay. Yeah, so what I would do there is I would definitely do a conditional column. So if you know what it's based off of, that's going to make your life a lot easier. Otherwise, you might have to do something stupid crazy like adding in a bunch of ifs. I would not recommend that. I would recommend making a custom column for, it looks like maybe week start and week end. And then from there have a custom column that calls those two values in as a concatenated field. Then you can join on your date still, because your date is likely not going to be a range date. And then when you graph it out, you can have that range. So if you, for like a kind of like a concrete example, I was asked to do like a weekend. So I essentially made like a weekend number and then added in a field that would display the way it was supposed to. So it kind of got like this weekend date that grabs the weekend from, let's see, there we go. That grabs the weekend from over here. So I've got my end of week Sunday. And then I just did that to text combine to add the WE. But you could do a text combine with two different columns that were more dynamic. That was essentially the week start and the weekend. That's probably what I would do to get that range like that. You post this and share the video. Yep. So no problem, Emma. Tackling a date table for a data set that has a fiscal and calendar. Oh, that's completely up to you. I mean, if you wanted to, I would probably just try and do it in one date table, just because it's going to make everything a lot easier on the back end with your data model. So if you have your main calendar date, as long as you have some kind of relationship between your main calendar date and your fiscal date, you can definitely do some kind of like day add. The trick with day add, though, is when you come across leap year, it becomes a little messy. So totally up to you. You can do one table or separate. I wouldn't do more than 2 date tables. This is probably one of the few examples that I would do 2 date tables in general. But if there is a way to combine it into one, I'd say that's probably ideal. So kind of like, I think there was another question about fiscal year end. As long as you make it some kind of variable, you can do a date difference and grab whatever fields you're needing from there. So essentially like fiscal year start, fiscal year end, and then you can grab the quarters from there as well. It becomes tricky. I've had different clients who have fiscal calendars that end on random days at the end of the month. Very dependent on what seems like the lunar cycle. I'm completely baffled how they decide what their month end is. So for situations like that, I tend to just import their calendar. So another nice thing with I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you can enter data here. And as long as it's under 2,000 rows, which a year is, you can just copy and paste it here from Excel. So pretty handy. That's probably what I would do for a really messy fiscal calendar. If it's a pretty clean fiscal calendar, I would just add those columns. Make the end date variable dynamic. So let me go ahead and look at, wrong one, advanced editor. So if we look at what I did in this one, and sorry guys, I didn't go too much into it. I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. But essentially, if you look at this one, what it's doing is it's formatting this as a date. And I know that I want a year from now. And I did January 1st. So essentially, it's going to grab the whole year's value for this year. It's basically all I wanted. But you can take the date.year function of date time local now. I added 1 and then 1, 1. I just hard coded in the month and the day, but you don't have to do that. Another option would have been ending date, so it doesn't get mad at me, would be to do something like, so we have today down here. I could just even say ending date is today and just say today. I could do hashtag date and then do date, year, today, and then maybe do like +1 to get next year. And then I could do 12/31. And what that would do for me is essentially give me the end of the year for next year. That makes it always dynamic. You can do the same thing with start date, right? If I wanted to, I could change this to start date and then take it from last year. And then I'd probably do 1 and 1 to get the beginning of last year. So lots of options. It's simpler than you might think, but only sometimes, which is kind of annoying. So this robust date table is what I'm going to include in my blog post for you guys. So this will have that example in there for you as well with a more dynamic filter, which hopefully means that if you're writing, like, I think I wrote 100 reports this year, I am not going to go in at the end of the year and change all those date tables. So this is definitely a good way to handle that problem in advance. Perfect. All right, well, I think that's all our questions and pretty much all our time. I'm going to throw this back up again in case you guys have any additional questions, but there we go.
All right. Thank you, Christina, so much for hosting. We greatly appreciate it. As for everybody else, like I said before, you guys will receive a recording tomorrow with this with the link in your email. I'm sorry, you guys will receive an email tomorrow with the recording link in your email box around noon, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As always, our webinars, our past, our present, are all on YouTube under Pragmatic Works. If you guys have any questions until then or after then, please feel free to reach out to Christina or myself, we'll be happy to help you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining this webinar, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. Again, Christina, thank you so much for hosting. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Crystal.
No problem. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.